So
Great.
Mikal Bridges, it's not going great for the New York Knicks. So last night, the Atlanta Hawks beat the New York Knicks 108-100 in the NBA Cup quarterfinals. And these are things that I've been talking about on Post Game Theory for a while. Bryce and I have been talking about, on the main show here. The national audience, I think, finally got a chance to see some of the issues that have been engulfing the Knicks defense over the course of the last month and a half, really. And it's tough. It's really hard because Mikal Bridges seems like a great dude, and the Villanova connection is a really fun story. But he's been really bad on defense. And this is stuff that goes back to Brooklyn. He was not awesome for Brooklyn on defense. We all kind of assumed that maybe like the effort wasn't quite as engaged as it was in Phoenix, right? Because in Phoenix, they were competing for a title year after year. But it seems like it may have been a bit more of an overall flexibility kind of fall off to me, because when you watch him in ball screens right now, it's a significant problem. He can't guard at the point of attack, just kind of point blank. And I just want to remind people what they gave up for him. And I want to contextualize it a little bit beyond this, but just to remind people what they gave up. Mikal Bridges, Keita Bates-Diop, a second-round pick, and the draft rights to Juan Pablo Valle. Shout out our Argentinian icon. The Nets got Bojan Bogdanovic, Mamadi Diakite, Shake Milton. This year's unprotected first-round pick from the Knicks. 2027's unprotected first-round pick. 2029's unprotected first-round pick. 2031's unprotected first-round pick. An unprotected pick swap in 2028. A first-round pick from Milwaukee that will likely transfer this year. And a second-round pick in 2025.
Thanks, Sam.
When Bryce and I talked about this when it happened, do you remember this, Bryce? We were literally live, like doing a mock draft, and then we had to stop the show and talk through this.
Yes.
And my immediate response was just like, this seems like a lot. And I had told you for months that like if Mikal Bridges gets traded, it's going to be like 3 or 4 firsts. Like that was I told you for a while, like it's going to be crazy, because I talked to like executives, frankly, that had like come close to offering that, basically. So like I knew that was what the market was. And I still thought that 5 firsts, 4 of which were unprotected, was very aggressive.
I mean, essentially 5 unprotected, right? I know it's the Bucks, but it was top 4 protected. Like it's 5 real first round picks, even if they're from good teams.
So let's start with Andrew.
Yay.
What was your immediate reaction to that deal? And how are you feeling about it at this specific point? After having watched Trae Young slice him on the court for an entire half last night.
Don't shortchange my guy, Cade Cunningham, slicing him up also. Go ahead, GMAC.
Who's the dude in Charlotte? Micic? What's his name?
Vecenie
Micic. Okay. I'm bad with pronunciations. I apologize. Yeah, he cooked him too. So this is a thing that has not been something we're excited about. So my reaction is actually pinned on my Instagram at the moment, because we over at Knicks Film School, we do a town hall where we get on Zoom and we chat with a bunch of Patreon patrons once a month. And we were actually recording our Patreon town hall with all of them, discussing what the Knicks might do in the offseason. When the trade went down, we were all very excited because we thought it was part of the final pieces of the puzzle. Pairing him with Anunoby seemed like you were putting together one of the best wing duos to compete with Boston, especially with what you saw Tatum and Brown do in the playoffs. You had 2 guys to match up perfectly. There was obviously the question of, well, now it's up with Julius. You know, like we renamed the Knicks Wingstop at a certain point, and they've just been wings. Haven't really much been stopping so far this season. But the thought was that the biggest thing at the time, and this is a shout out to Monica McNutt, ESPN personality, but also works for MSG here in New York. She came on our show after the season that the Knicks got eliminated last year and made a point that Knicks really had established a culture with this Villanova thing, that, you know, it's fun and it's more of a joke to everybody else, but they really did feel like a family affair here. And the first thing that we saw from the four of them, Dante DiVincenzo, Jalen Brunson, Josh Hart, Mikal Bridges, after the trade was announced, was a screenshot of the four of them on FaceTime reacting to the trade. And it seemed like this point that Monica had made of protect the culture at all cost was like, oh, they're now tripling down on culture, that this Villanova thing is going to be like the backbone of this. And even if they're going to take some time to develop into a contender, then they at least have the power of friendship is going to be something to enjoy.
And sorry to interject on this real quick before you continue, but do you remember what like Jalen Brunson's reaction to the Josh Hart deal was also filmed?
Yeah.
And like he was just at like I think a jersey retirement ceremony for someone or something.
I forget if it was at Villanova or if it was at like his high school, but he was getting his jersey retired. Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone filmed his reaction to them trading for Josh Hart. Yes.
And he was like thrilled. I mean, like unsurprisingly, right? Because they're really, really close. And, you know, he and Mikal and Josh, like all three of those guys are really, really close. So like, of course there was like a real palpable excitement. And I actually like completely agree with Monica. Like that culture is so critical to having a chance to win a title. Being good and like playing basketball well is more important.
Yes.
Though, unfortunately.
Which the second question you asked, how do I feel now? So let me just, if I told you when we did that Karl-Anthony Towns pod after it happened, when the three of us talked, if I told you through 25 games in, the Knicks would have the 6th best net rating, the 2nd best offense by percentage points in the NBA, that Cat would be like averaging 25 and 13 on 54, 45, 84 splits. That Jalen Brunson was shooting 43% from three and averaging a career high in assists. That Josh Hart would have a 67 effective field goal percentage, 70% at the rim, be shooting 43% from three. And that OG Anunoby
and like Josh is averaging like 14, 15 points a game. Like it's not like he's just like picking his spots and, you know, vulturing. Like he's like actually like really producing.
The added spacing has benefited him as well because of his especially in transition. Okay. So like all these things are going well, that OG Anunoby's in all-star conversations, and that the starting five that they put together was a +6 in a league best 841 possessions. You'd be like, oh, so it's working, right? Like it's off to a great start. 25 games. It seems like it's going well. And to the reason that we're here today, to talk about Mikal Bridges' point of attack defense, there's nothing that screamed contender about this team yet. And this is a pretty all-in team at the moment. Now, this is year one, and right now quarter one of year one of this run. And this is why Jalen Brunson making minimum wage helps. But the returns have not been great at the moment.
Jalen Brunson, by the way, like, I think personally, there's a very real chance Jalen Brunson does not sign that very low extension number if they don't commit to, you know, bringing his friends along. Because, hey, quality of life is important. And you can make $60 million having a slightly lower quality of life, or you can make $40 million having an amazing quality of life with your friends, where you get to play in New York and you get to have this amazing experience. Like that sounds cool to me, right?
Again, it's the doubling down on culture. Like they went and added another person from the Villanova collective, and then Jalen does a family a favor. And that's where we were at the start of the season. Like, okay, this is a family they've created. And then right before training camp, they traded for Cat, and that I thought was going to be all right, did they just like forfeit culture for a ceiling play? And Cat's been a revelation, and it's been Bridges. That's like the whoa, what happened here? That's the thing I thought was going to be fine. So to answer your question, there are concerns here in the New York area.
Okay, so the Knicks are 15-10. So you just look at that on its face. They are on pace for 49, 50 wins, like something like that. Like that's the ballpark. And yet they've played the third easiest schedule in the league per Basketball Reference. And on top of it, like just when you watch them play good teams, like they do just kind of slice them on defense. And I'll let Bryce kind of give a thought here real quick, but I want to give you credit for this because I think it's actually really, really important. You and I were just texting back and forth last night, Andrew and I. And I think you actually brought up like a really, really critical point here. It's not that Towns is the problem. Towns at the 5 is not necessarily the problem in and of itself. It's that Bridges is the problem, and that Bridges is getting cooked in ball screens left and right and is a magnet for contact on these screens and gets crushed and can't recover, or he takes like these ridiculously wide angles because I feel like his hip flexibility is not particularly good right now. That's the issue here. It's not that Karl isn't doing his part. I think Karl isn't great in drop coverage. I don't think he's fantastic. He does let guys get behind him from time to time, but I do think he's actually kind of doing his best guarding like 1-on-2 in those situations. And he's not great at it, but he's not catastrophic at it. Like he's not disastrous. It's just that the guards, Brunson as well, are putting him in a really difficult spot. But, and this is where the but comes in, it's really hard to have Towns as your center if you're going to have guards that are going to get beat like this. You do need like a real impact big on the defensive end who can guard 1-on-2 if your guards are going to get beat like this. So it's almost like a catch-22 to me right now, where I can't actually blame anything on Towns. It's really on Bridges. But this is kind of the bargain that you make when you do have Towns at center. It's hard to actually cultivate a great defense. Let me rephrase. It is somewhat hard, but more than anything, there is drastically less margin for error, I think, with Towns at center from the rest of your defenders on the court. Bryce.
No, I mean, I just think that was always the case. When they traded for Towns, it was like, okay, you're giving something up defensively. Like whenever you trade out iHeart for Cats, you're giving up something defensively to get something offensively. What you got offensively has paid off, right? Like GMAC correctly pointed all of that out. The answer defensively was, look at these wings. We have to guard this shit out of everybody. And it's kind of funny if you go back to opening night when the Celtics carved them up and we all said, oh, well, it's just the Celtics. Like this isn't going to be what it is. And then it's continued against other good teams and even against some teams that aren't good. That's why it rests on Mikal Bridges. They didn't trade, I don't think, GMAC for Karl-Anthony Towns to make the defense better. They traded for Cat to make the offense better, expecting the other guy they traded for, the other two guys they traded for, OG and Mikal, to be able to hold the defense up enough from the wing.
Yeah,
go ahead, just real quick, numbers wise here. So when Towns, Bridges, and Brunson are on the court together, they give up a 116.3 defensive rating. That is not very good, frankly. Like we can call that out. I can look at where exactly that would sit league wide. That would be, let's see here, 116.3 would have them 22nd in the league defensively.
What's the offense?
The offense is 123.3. The offense is like elite. So elite.
Plus
when
7.
Those guys are on the court. They're a +7 when those three are together on the court. Like they are really, really good. With Towns on the court, and this has only happened for 52 minutes, without Bridges and Brunson, They have a 106.5 defensive rating. Now, unsurprisingly, because Brunson isn't on the court, the offense falls off a cliff and they lose those minutes. But I think that kind of does, just like even over small sample, show that it is like a lot of pressure being put on Towns more than anything, because the perimeter defenders are causing him issues in drop. I don't say that to say they're a better team without Mikal Bridges or a better team without Jalen Brunson. They're absolutely unequivocally not. And I think Jalen Brunson has been fantastic this season, particularly on the offensive end, getting everybody involved and adjusting to a slightly new role, even for him as a passer and playmaker with the Knicks. But there is just a lot of pressure being put on Towns at the end of the day defensively at this point.
On nights that their offense isn't clicking, which I guess come playoff time, that's going to be more of a concern. Yes. I gotta be honest. Like, I have zero complaints about Karl-Anthony Towns, even on the defensive end. Like, what his defensive rebounding has been this year. Like, I know all the fancy stats, the LeBrons, the EPMs have all pointed to like Jokic as a poor rim protector, but like, because of his impacting rebounding throughout the playoffs, they were able to make one significant run. Now he's Jokic, he's an alien. That's not what the Knicks are going to be able to replicate. But the thought was like top 3 offense, top 16 defense, and that's the formula. And the problem is that even with Cat being exactly as advertised, come playoff time, when the sample sizes of the regular season don't matter as much, because it's like how you do against one team for 7 games, you get into the right matchup where, to be honest, Sam, my bigger takeaway from last night, aside from what Trey did on the offensive end, was that Dyson Daniels was able to kind of turn Brunson's water off. Then how are you going to be able to at least keep the tide from turning the other way, which is what Atlanta did last year? When now the Knicks, there's some romanticism of the Knicks last year, that they were like this try hard team that won 50 games and the power of friendship, and they beat you by just effort and playing every minute of every game. And that team, I think, is not as good as a lot of Knicks fans gave it out to be, as much as they hold a place in my heart forever. This team is clearly better, has a better record than they did at this point last year, but there's a lower floor because of what the defense is. When their offense isn't clicking and you just need a stop, they're not always getting that stop. So that's where last night was so eye-opening, at least for me. But it's more than just like, if Mikal Bridges isn't playing better defense, then they're cooked. It's like there's also if the other team has a Dyson Daniels and we can't get our offense going because Jalen's in jail, what do we do? What's the pivot? And I don't know if they have it.
And this is where I'm really interested, just for the Knicks' future, right? In terms of lineup construction and in terms of like what they do now, because they have to make moves, in my opinion, to really try and get to that next echelon, which is ultimately what they're trying to do with a team that is totally all in, doesn't have its picks, et cetera, et cetera. In terms of matchups, I actually think I would pick the Hawks to beat them in a 7-game series right now. That's not to say I would pick them.
They're a bad matchup for him in a 3-6. Yeah,
they are a particularly bad matchup. I think I would pick the Knicks to beat Orlando, despite the fact that I think Orlando, even with Paulo and Franz, is a better team than Atlanta. I just think that the way Atlanta plays particularly is that they play super heavy ball screen. They're going to get Bridges and Brunson super involved. Okay, let's say that we can slide Bridges off. We can put OG on Young, right? Well, they tried to do that in the 4th quarter, where they'd have Harton, Anunoby, taking turns on Young, and then they'd switch actions, and it was almost always Anunoby and Hart that was ending up on Trey. The end result, though, was that you'd have Brunson then as the low man on the weak side, and he can't tag, and he's getting beaten backdoor on cuts as well. So structurally, the way that Atlanta plays, on top of, and this is the key point, them having Dyson Daniels to be able to cut off the water for Jalen Brunson, that worries me. Now, Orlando, for instance, Orlando plays like a more mid-range heavy style game. They don't play as aggressively in ball screens necessarily. I think that feeds more into the Knicks being able to have like a pretty solid defensive structure and infrastructure. And I would bet on the Knicks offense being able to overcome the Orlando defense at this point, as much as I love that Orlando defense. But the problem with this Knicks team build is that they are very vulnerable now, not only to great teams like Boston, right? Because Boston will just get we'll get Tatum and Brown switched on to Brunson and Bridges, and we'll just attack because that's what they do all the time, and that they'll be successful doing that, and they have all the spacing in the world, and they have all the defenders to throw at Brunson, right? They've made themselves vulnerable to teams like Atlanta now, is what worries me. On top of like, who knows with the Cavs, right? Like the Cavs would be really interesting to me because they have a great defense. They don't really have the stopper to throw onto Brunson unless you want to throw a Okoro out there, but that
Okoro's given them trouble over the years. Yeah.
He absolutely has, but like it also screws up their offensive flow from a spacing perspective, and then gives the Knicks a chance to kind of beat them in a number of ways. And then they have multiple bodies they can throw on Towns, etc. Right? I think I would pick the Cavs in that series, but it's close to me. Like I'd need to think about it a little bit more. This episode of Game Theory is brought to you by BetterHelp. This month is all about gratitude, and there's someone that we don't often think about and thank enough: ourselves. Sometimes it's hard to remind ourselves that we're trying our best to make sense of everything. Look, in this world, it is not easy. Here's a reminder to send some thanks to the people in your life, and that does include yourself. I'm someone who's absolutely gone to therapy in the past, particularly when I got diagnosed with ADHD. It's helped me immensely to understand myself, understand particularly how to put boundaries up with my interests, how to put boundaries up with work. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Let the gratitude flow with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/game theory today and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, BetterHelp.com/game theory. My Doer jeans are truly my favorite piece of clothing that I own right now. They sent me out a pair of jeans and they are fantastic. I've been wearing these things everywhere that I can whenever I go out of the house. They are so comfortable. They look great. They feel great. They're stylish. They're versatile. You can wear them in a lot of different situations. They are fantastic, fantastic jeans. Doer is built for doing, with styles of stretch performance denim and lifestyle apparel for everyone in every season. Doer has you covered for the colder winter months with fabrics like a fireside denim, which is interwoven with fleece for warmth without too much bulk. Plus, Doer's clothes are sustainably crafted to last. They're going to be a staple in my closet for years. I am going to try and get them to send me more clothes out, in all honesty, because they have been so good. I love my Doers, and I'm sure you will too. Check out Doer's flagship stores in LA or Denver, or shop online at shopdoer.com/game theory. That's shopduer.com/game theory. Right now, my listeners are going to get 20% off your first purchase when you use that exclusive URL. Don't wait. Get 20% off at shopdoer.com/game theory. I just think that they are, in a 7-game series, very vulnerable to good coaches being able to pick apart what they do on defense in a way that really worries me. They don't have as much flexibility from a scheme perspective on defense, unless like Mitchell Robinson comes back or they make a move, and we'll talk about that momentarily. But what is your overall thought about like their matchup flexibility and the way that they can play defensively? Because that's what worries me in a playoff series, is a good coach just being like, we're just absolutely going to crush like what you do.
Our first response last night on the Knicks Film School post game show, shameless plug, was
No, please, everybody go follow Knicks Film School. I truly love what they do. They do a great job. Shout out Macri, shout out GMAC.
So the first thought when we jumped on StreamYard to react to that was like, man, this would be a tough matchup first round. You know,
Yeah.
like if this is the 3-6, this is a matchup issue more than anything. And like the Bucks and the Pacers, that was a matchup issue. I know Giannis got hurt, but during the season, the Pacers just like played them well. Like you ask anybody in Boston, the Pacers, because they also like to play the 3-point variance game sometimes, they were also just like a tough matchup for Boston, which is we saw that play in the conference finals last year. If it's a matchup thing, yeah, the Hawks give them problems aside from like the Trae Young villain stuff, you know, like I got to be honest. We've spent most of this conversation talking about their defense and what a good coaches can do to them. The Hawks scored 108 points last night. The Knicks went 11 of 42 from three. Like the offensive side of the ball was significantly more of a standout to me because I hadn't seen a team shut their water off. That opening night against Boston, that everybody was like, oh my gosh, Boston was raining threes. The Knicks defense, oh no. The Knicks were 50, 40, 90 that night. And it was like, oh, so it has to be better. If you told me going into last night that all the Mikal Bridges problems that we've seen throughout the year, all the cat in drop stuff that we've seen throughout the year would still happen, and they'd only give up 108 points, I'd be like, oh, so the Knicks won by like 17, right? And that's why the concerning thing is a good coach being able to game plan if they have somebody that they can put on Brunson, like a longer wing. He just struggles with length. It's been a thing the last 2 years. You know, Nick Nurse game 1 and 2 last year played a combination of Batum and Kelly Oubre on Brunson, and he has 2 least efficient high volume shooting games of the season. You know, that's more what concerns me, is that you'll also be able to shut down this very high powered, efficient offense. And then you also get to take advantage of them on defense. I have no illusions that they're going to get better defensively, especially if this is the Mikal Bridges that's here to stay. It's if the offense can be deterred, then the blueprint's at risk then. So that's honestly my bigger takeaway or biggest worry at the moment, is that a good coach is going to be able to game plan for this offense, you know, come playoff time.
Bryce, any thoughts here?
No, I mean, that's, as he said, that's the concern. You know, and I look through the playoff content, like throw Boston out. Cleveland's a tough one, right? Because they do offensively what this team really struggles with. And then it really comes down to, like you guys mentioned, can you play Okoro, or can somebody else shut him down, or can you funnel him into those 2 bigs? You know, and so that's not a great matchup. I think Orlando, you know, that makes sense where they don't run as much ball screen stuff. And so when you just start to look at matchups, that's what it's going to come down to for them, if they can't get it figured out. Like this has been fascinating for me to watch with Bridges, because I just knew he was going to be like, we're going to talk about all NBA defense, Mikal Bridges again, right? Because the offensive use, you know, he's not even the second dude there. Like, is he the third all the time? Like, probably, I guess. OG's scoring more, but that's just because he's been super efficient right now. But you know what I mean? Like, the offensive pressure am I not giving him enough credit for the offensive load he has to take? I just can't feel like it's enough to not warrant better defense than what we're getting.
So I'll actually add something to that, Bryce, because it's not just necessarily an offensive load, because he's leading the league in minutes, like total minutes played. So there's a Tom Thibodeau thing, and I'm not the biggest Tibbs critic in the world. Actually, what he's done for this franchise that was lost and in the wilderness for a long time, bringing a base level, and now seeing like Tibbs having the second best offense in the league is actually pretty much a revelation. But some of his tendencies are like, oh, this is working, I'm just going to keep playing it until it's not working anymore. And then maybe I'll call a timeout, give it a little break, and then put it back on the floor and keep it playing. Bridges is kind of his own backup at the moment. They've been playing an 8-man rotation. So if you want to put something on wear and tear, there may be something to that. I actually would argue he's been the second option more often in his minutes, because he's like Brunson leaves and Bridges stays on to be the second option. Cat leaves, Bridges is still on, and he stays with Brunson. He sits for 4 minutes, comes back, and then he's back on the court with whichever of the All-Stars is still there. So, look, he's been lethal from the corners. Above the break has been a roller coaster. For a while it was like, well, does he have like a cap on his range and he just won't hit it? And he had like a good 5-game stretch offensively. But to your point, Bryce, we thought if all those other stats I started off with, we thought if we were getting that, then we were also getting Mikal Bridges all NBA, all defense, and maybe the Knicks are 20-5 right now.
Yeah.
But they're 15-10, which isn't 10-15, but it's 15-10. They have the 6th best net rating. We're hoping the play better button gets pushed. Maybe a week off because they're not going to Vegas. Maybe a practice or two. Some of that gets ironed out. But I do share your big picture concerns that if this is the Bridges that's here to stay, the contender ceiling, it might not actually get hit. That is a concern.
Because then the other team I was trying to think of was the Bucks too. So like, who's guarding Damian Lillard then whenever you play the Bucks? And I know they're not as pick and roll heavy, but I would assume that when you get to the playoffs, Doc will push the Dame Giannis, Dame Brook Lopez ball screens, and I guess my thought was there's a few teams there in the East that they just can't avoid them every single round on the way to the Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals. It could even be a first round matchup against a Hawks team or a Bucks team. Or like you mentioned, like what if the Hornets find themselves, out of the play-in and in a first round matchup? I'm not saying that they would beat them. I would never think that, but they could maybe give them fits and put 80 more minutes on those Mikal Bridges legs.
Bryce, the team would be your beloved Detroit Pistons.
Pistons,
they're
sure.
a little bit more solid. They have Cade. Cade just caused them all sorts of problems.
Which again, the Pistons would not beat them in a playoff series, but Cade may go off for 2 games where it just makes them play 2 extra games that they shouldn't need to. And as you just pointed out, GMAC, in those 2 games, these dudes are all playing 40 minutes after an 82 game season of them playing 37 minutes a night.
Right.
Hold on, 40? So you have them getting 8 minutes off? That's generous.
Playoff series 44. My bad. Playoff series 44.
Maybe that's optimistic. If they're sitting, I'm like, oh, what happened? Are they hurt? I do think they're a little more credit needs to be given to their offense. And in a Milwaukee matchup, who's guarding Brunson?
No, that's a great point.
Every action and
100%
score 130 in that series. So that's why I do have the defensive concerns.
Yeah, they play pretty heavy drop. Cat would be able to pick and pop them pretty hard.
Yeah.
And the Knicks
I actually think
murder dropped this year too.
Yeah, I actually think the Knicks would beat the Bucks right now.
No, I do too. I'm just saying that they could find themselves in a series every round of the playoffs where these issues we're bringing up could be an issue. Even if they win the series, the amount of games it takes to win those series could be prolonged because there's a couple games where they shoot 14 of whatever from 3, 12 of whatever from 3, whatever. Their offense isn't quite good enough and they can't get the stops. So
you have 3 or 4 minutes here until you have to leave, Andrew. Looking forward here, is there something you want them to do at the trade deadline to kind of shore this up? I've heard more guardy kind of names associated when I've talked about the Knicks to people, but do you look at Mitchell Robinson and do him does he become a trade chip, or does he become a part of the solution and you move Towns to the 4? What is your vision for what you want here?
I want it clear. I speak for me and not all Knicks fans, because this is a very polarizing question amongst the fan base from what I've seen.
Yeah.
I don't want to punt on Towns at the 5 this season. I just don't. I think what we've seen offensively has shown enough of a ceiling that I want to try and make it work for a season. They don't have to win the title in year 1 of this experiment, but that's what it is. It's an experiment. So while I'd love for Mitch to come back and give you some minutes of him at the 5 and Towns at the 4, against certain teams. The entire experiment is, can we make this work? And it requires Mikal Bridges to be better, of course. But my focus is if you can get some kind of wing. The problem is they're so asset
Depleted.
empty. Yeah, at this point that I don't know if there's a wing worth a damn. Why are the Knicks getting them and not a team with, I don't know, a first round pick available?
Yeah, and a big issue there as well is that to do that you might have to move a Deuce McBride, and Deuce might be completely essential to them as a point of attack defender against guys like Trae Young, whoever is a different option that you can throw at these players if Mikal Bridges can't do it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's almost filling one hole by, creating another. Right. So that's what's tricky about this for the Knicks. It probably, if they are going to get a perimeter player, and if you are sold on the Towns at the 5 thing, it probably does have to be a Mitchell Robinson deal. But by trading Mitchell, you end up giving yourself no option otherwise then.
Yes, but this is gonna sound crazy. I don't Precious Achiuwa as a 4 in a switch everything next to Cat as a backup is fine. Again, the experiment, the entire blueprint rides on Mikal Bridges eventually figuring it out, which the more fascinating starting lineup change that will not happen this year because they gave up 5 picks for Mikal Bridges, but it's Deuce coming in and being your point of attack defender that has been toward the top of the league in all the LeBrons and the EPMs, all the tracking data says he's been outstanding. Yeah. And then Bridges potentially goes to the bench. It's just not happening because you don't bench a guy that you just traded 5 picks for that was Jalen Brunson's roommate in college. But
the name here is Hart. Hart.
Which, are you creating that principle or that standard that a guy averaging his best splits across the board has done everything you've asked for? And by the way, your rebounding will take a hit if you take the best rebounding guard in the league off the floor.
And to be clear, they are league average in defensive rebounding and 21st in offensive rebounding, and that's with Josh Hart.
Yeah. So I think if you went to if the panic button gets pressed and they went to Mitchell Robinson next to Cat, then Josh Hart comes off the floor. Although at this point, no, they're not. I thought through it for a second. No, they're not benching Mikal Bridges. They're not making him a backup. But if you wanted to go to that, yes, Josh Hart becomes your 6th man. The concerns before the season were if you wanted to play a true 5 out, that Josh Hart isn't a good enough shooter. And so Deuce McBride for Josh Hart made sense in that starting 5. Here we are, 25 games in, and Josh Hart's shooting 10% better from 3 than Mikal Bridges. Small sample size, 25 games in, but he's done his job as a quote unquote floor spacer. So again, it's the precedent that you set with a guy averaging what he's averaging, playing like he's playing, suddenly has to go to the bench because somebody else is playing so poorly.
Yeah, it's very tricky. If I was them, I think I would try to go get another perimeter defensive option that I felt pretty reasonable about. Those guys, there aren't a ton of them on the market, if I'm being completely honest, and I've done quite a dive into this recently for the NBA trade deadline big board that will be coming next week on The Athletic. I mean, just looking at names, there just aren't a ton of them. There just truly aren't many out there where you would feel great about it. Bruce Brown's making 20+ million, and that's just not something that fits into their salary cap structure. What you'd really be hoping for is that Lonzo doesn't get traded and the Bulls do him a solid and he would sign as a buyout or something to go and try and contend. But even then, that the Bulls love Lonzo from everything I've been told. So I don't know if that would even be a thing that would happen.
Wouldn't Mitch and Precious get Bruce Brown done, or does he make more than both of them combined?
Sure, but why would the Raptors do that?
That's true. Good point. That's a good point. I was just trying to match salary there. I wasn't even thinking about the basketball fit. If the Raptors don't care about fit at all, if they're just heavy on the white flag for Cooper Flag,
Yeah. I mean, look, you could do, if you threw in like Kolek or if you threw Dottier in, like there are people who like Dottier around the league. It's just like the Knicks presumably also like Dottier and hope that he can develop into something.
Tell
So
Tibbs that, please.
I'm not one of those people. I was not a huge fan pre-draft, so I'm not going to be that. Not going to tell Tibbs that, but I'm sure I could find someone that would.